One of the questions that we seem to get asked a lot is, how did we meet? And every time that we are asked that, you always go, Susie, you go first. So I'm going to turn the tables and say, Rachel, you go first, because we don't often get that way round.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate that we're going off script on our first venture into YouTube land. Um, so that's fine. Um, when I thought that I needed a full-time job because I had spent enough time at home with my toddler, and I decided that I really wanted to talk to people who were capable of complex sentences, somebody said to me, "You need to build a brand." And my immediate thought was, I'm not freaking Barbie. I don't know what you're talking about building a brand. But I did start writing about the chief of staff role because it's what I know. And as I did that, LinkedIn, their algorithm provided me a whole array of people who were writing about the chief of staff role. And it turns out I disagree with a lot of them. Um, except for this one woman in the middle of the UK who kept writing about it in a way that actually made sense to me. And according to Susie, I will put this in because you need to say it. I kept commenting on her stuff and saying, you're right. We should actually probably meet. And you reached out to me on DM in LinkedIn, on my DMs.
I
And
did.
I am notoriously awful about responding to LinkedIn DMs. Like sometimes I'll do it within 20 minutes, but most of the time I'm doing it within a month, give or take. And you were particularly miffed. I wouldn't even go that far, but you were
Oh, it wasn't.
miffed.
It wasn't. I wasn't particularly big. I know. I take great pleasure in taking the Mickey and saying that you ignored me. But the funniest part of that story is that there was another comment from you about 4 days
Oh, yeah.
later saying we should meet, and I'd replied, I did message you, and that's when you went and actually found the message, and we organized to actually talk.
I feel like that's a universal thing that happens with people who are very busy and juggling a lot, which is whatever's at the top of your inbox is what you deal with. So you reminding me was actually very helpful. Regardless, we finally figured out a time to meet. Um, and it turns out that the time that we decided to meet was the time when you couldn't actually talk. But we talked for over an hour anyway, even though we were scheduled for like 20 minutes. Now you can take it from here.
And just to clarify, yeah, to clarify, not being able to talk, we're fairly sure I had COVID, and there was no pain, I just no sound coming out.
No sound.
My husband was in heaven, no sound. It was I'm not quite sure how we communicated for that long, but there was nothing coming out. And everything stemmed from there. So we spoke, we aligned, we got on, we have, I wouldn't say a similar sense of humor, but complementary sense of humor. And then we said, how can we make this role better? Because so many people seem to be misunderstanding or even worse, blatantly undermining the chief of staff role, which we both know can be such an impactful role for any organization.
I just hate the word impactful. I think it's a made up word. But yes, you're absolutely right. It has tremendous impact.
As soon as you said
Uh,
that, bearing in mind people need to know the type of people we are, I'm going to impactful and thinking about my poor lawn at the moment that looks like it's had several bomb impacts on it because my puppies are digging it up. So I quite like the word impactful. And actually, that's why our partnership works, because we don't agree on everything. There will
That's true.
be things that, yeah, and
But I think
today
we
is the
agree
day that
on
I
the
found
big
out that
stuff.
impact is one of them.
Yeah. But we agree on the big stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we looked at the chief of staff role and decided that one of the first things that we would look at is actually what is a chief of staff role. And I know
Wait
I
a
said
minute.
at the
You're
beginning
missing a
of this,
key
one of the
part of
most
the
common.
story.
Oh no, what have I missed out? See, this is why you
So
should never leave me in charge.
you said to me, I have a secret. And I said, I love secrets.
Secret.
Please do tell. Um, and you said, I've written a lot of assessments and diagnostics that I've been sitting on for several years. And I said, that's interesting. How about you send me one? To which you said,
Oh, and I did.
oh,
I
I actually don't need to
I
send
said,
it to you.
yep. No, I think you said, "Oh, I'll do it." And I said, "You don't need
Right.
to. I've already ran the diagnostic on you."
Yes, which was both
That must have been a little bit, yeah,
terrifying,
weird.
weird, probably a little stronger than weird. Weird with like a side of terrifying or creepy. But, you seemed nice. Although at that point, I really didn't know you. And also, I thought you were a buttoned up Brit, which couldn't be further from the truth. So I said, okay, send me what you've got. And you sent it to me. And I guess I didn't really look at it until several hours later. And when I did, I was deeply disturbed in a good way because you
I
had
was gonna say,
nailed me
you
to
are
the
setting
wall.
this up. I was gonna say, you were setting this up with creepy, disturbed, and,
Well, I mean,
just
it
gonna.
had a good ending. It had a good ending because we're here. But nevertheless, you nailed me to the wall. And you did it entirely based on public statements, which granted, I had made a lot of because of LinkedIn, but I had also just done my first podcast and it didn't go quite as well as I wanted it to. And you nevertheless got the whole kit and caboodle of me just by analyzing that stuff, the stuff that was out there. And um yeah, I was pretty blown away by it. So the other thing that you have to understand about me is that I curse, like, the F word was my first word. It's like very much a part of my vernacular. But I don't usually curse. I don't compound curse. So I don't do multiple curses in the same sentence unless I'm really driven to. Um, and, this report that you gave me drove me to that because I called you at 1 o'clock in the morning. I did ask if you were asleep and you said you weren't. So I want to make sure that
It was 1 a.m. UK time.
I was very kind and considerate and that I texted you because I have to make up for the fact that I apparently ignored you for 4 days in the DMs. So I can be kind and considerate. I did text you and ask you if you were awake. You said you were. I picked up the phone and when you answered, I said, holy fucking shitballs. Do you know what you have here? And thus began the Cool and Gold group. How's that?
That is like a reverse horror story.
Indeed.
We
It's the best
started with
kind.
creepy. We moved to disturb. We went to nailing someone on the wall. And then we come to the nice part. So yeah, just a reverse horror story.
Well,
I
actually like
think
that because I wanna make sure we're clear. I like that because I hate when women play the dumb, stupid, "Oh, I'm gonna go down the stairs in the dark attic because obviously nothing is going to happen to me even though we're in the middle of a horror film." You know?
or even worse, and I think it was Reese Witherspoon I saw say this, it's like, when the woman turns round to one of the male characters and goes, "What do we do now?" Um,
What do we
I'm
do
not sure I've
now?
ever done I'm not sure. Yeah, I just can't imagine. Usually, in real life, there's usually a very, very capable woman where everyone goes, what should we do?" And it's usually them answering the question. Just another thing of, yeah, movies aren't quite always realistic.
That's right. Because no capable woman turns to anybody and says, "What do we do now?" Nobody does that. But also, usually it's the woman who's taking charge and figuring out how to get all of this done.
I think we've gone slightly off topic,
You're
which
right, we totally have.
these continue, will happen more and more because this is
That's true.
basically what it's like having a conversation with us. We will go off on different tangents, but we'll always come back to the main subject. When I came back from my not being able to speak publicly period, because any comment that I made would have been
Because you were in
attributed to who I
politics and you
worked
couldn't
with.
do that. Yes.
Very much so. And I came back to LinkedIn. I'd had my LinkedIn account for, I can't actually remember, probably for nearly as long as LinkedIn's been around. And I was just so shocked at the narrative around the chief of staff role. It seemed to be going between an executive assistant, and I have to say, executive assistants are amazing. They are also a vital part of an executive office, and they do such a valuable job. And the core value of what they do is actually the core value of what a chief of staff does. Bear with me on this. Not in the same
Okay.
way, not on the same
I know.
things, but on judgment. Because you can have AI have your calendar and book your appointments and draft your emails. But what it doesn't have is judgment. And that's where an executive assistant really, really shows their worth is when they have that judgment. And I was seeing comments like, EA is tactical and chief of staff is strategic. And I'm thinking, what's gone wrong? So I have to stick my hand up, literally, and go, I'm going to back the EAs here and say, don't let people tell you this stuff. That it's wrong. You are strategic. You do have judgment, and what you do is really, really valuable. But it's not a chief of staff role.
It's totally
And
different.
it's they're not even it's not a pipeline into a chief of staff role. They are in different lanes. They need different skills, they need different experience. That's not saying someone who's been an EA cannot move across into a chief of staff role, but it's not a progression on. And this is what I was seeing. And then the other side that I was seeing is an over indexation on the actual leader or an executive. And I was thinking, this isn't the way that the role can be really impactful. And you worked with a chief of staff in the White House, which we could say is the blueprint. And would you say that their role was purely a glorified next step up from an executive assistant, or that everything they did was purely for the president? Now, they probably was, but not in the way people think it was.
Right. I I will say something somewhat controversial, which is I think that the chief of staff is actually more important than the vice president. The vice president does a lot of really important work at funerals and at award ceremonies and all of that. But when and look, it has evolved because Dick Cheney got in and sort of really shaped it into something that it wasn't prior. But uh when I was there and it was Clinton, um no, John Podesta was really uh the critical player in the entire federal bureaucracy because he was making sure that the Department of Defense and the Department of State were not saying the exact opposite things on the same day. And when you have to coordinate across the behemoth known as the federal government, you need somebody who's really dedicated to doing just that and that alone and almost nothing else. I think the other thing that John did exceptionally well was in a world where Clinton was surrounded by people who adored him. um, a lot of them worked with him when he was the governor of Arkansas. Uh, John was the one who walked into the Oval Office and said, "Wait a minute. You can't do that, Mr. President." And somebody's got to say that, right? I think that that's a critical part of a role that is, as you and I have agreed, is nine. There are 9 dimensions. There are 9 functions within the role, and one of them is challenging the executive and serving as somebody who's not the yes man or the yes woman. That's important, I think. Wouldn't you say?
I agree, because every office, with every leader, whether we're talking about politics or businesses, is surrounded by people who rely on that leader for their role. They are telling them the things that they think they want to hear. They don't want to be the one delivering any bad news. They want to be the ones telling them the good news and showing their worth. And there's a lot of pressure. I mean, I'm not saying that they're doing something wrong. It's the pressure. It's everything that's involved. But someone has to be there to turn around and say, "You're being an idiot. This is wrong." Or to be able to say, "Actually, they've told you that this is happening, but the bit that you don't know is this underneath."
It puts us on a really good topic, which is let's talk about the chief of staff in the UK for the prime minister, because you have some very strong views on that. Do you not?
I do, and do you know what? It's one of the few areas. No, there's more than a few. One thing you'll also see is that I do take a lot of pleasure in needling Rachel over things. So
You
one of
do.
the few areas that I will concede that the US does something much better than the UK is in this aspect. The chief of staff in the White House is a really well-defined role. Everyone knows what they do. The chief of staff in number 10 Downing Street, who knows? Sometimes they have the mandate. Usually they're picking from someone who has shown loyalty, is going to be the yes man, is going to be their henchman, whatever it is. And it's not well defined. They don't have that same level of inherent authority across what they're doing, why they're doing, what their role should involve. And it means we get a real mishmash of realistically failures. And I'm pretty sure we've ended up with, believe it or not, even though we've had so many prime ministers in recent years, we've ended up with more chiefs of staff than we have prime ministers. So that tells you that something's not working.
Hmm.
And It is one of the areas where I wouldn't say it would have removed a lot of the challenges, crises that have happened in Number 10 on both sides of the party divide. But it would have minimized some of them. It wouldn't have been the complete chaos continuously lurching from one thing to another. If there was someone in that role, as you said, making sure that the departments weren't going against each other, all of these things. And we're missing it. We're absolutely missing it in 10 Downing Street. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with the new Prime Minister and whether they do a better job of mandating that role. But past experience doesn't give me a lot of. I don't have a huge amount of. I've completely forgotten the word I need to use there. What's the word I'm looking for? This is a joy of being my age and menopausal.
I mean, it could just be that it's a Friday.
Friday, it's sunny outside.
Yeah.
No, I've completely lost the word. And do you know what? It will come back to me probably at 3 o'clock in the morning.
It always does at 3 o'clock in the morning. So this is interesting because I also think it's an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about the chief of staff definition that we came up with, which incidentally, we got a lot of terrific feedback about. In part, I think because we actually consulted a number of chiefs of staff beforehand to say, does this make sense? Are we close? And, there were some quibbles and there were some differences, but for the most part, people were very supportive of our view. So would you like to tell, as if this is a prize that you get, like The Price is Right, would you like to tell the audience what the chief of staff 9 functions are?
I feel like I'm being tested
You
because.
are.
Oh, am I? Am I? Wonderful.
I
I
mean,
love it.
sure. Somebody's got to needle you. There's got to be equal needling, equal opportunity needling. Come on.
True, true. It's really interesting though, because before we put that out, it was one of the things that actually I was most worried about putting out because of all of the different definitions, explainers, those 3 slides that come out going, a chief of staff is this, that, and the other, that I thought there would be huge pushback on. And I was prepared to defend it. But I was really actually pleasantly surprised when it had the reaction that you just described. So, the 9 functions.
Because you had to check on your computer. Go ahead.
I just sat here and couldn't think of a word, which I
Of
still
a
can't think
word.
of.
I mean, that's
A
fair.
word, a
That's
word
fair.
that a word that means, I don't know,
I don't even remember.
positive expectation. And then I'm going, am I actually going to remember all of these, considering we both wrote this? And
Yes.
I wasn't 100% sure. So,
Okay.
okay, I can give the names. Do you want to give the definitions? Because that's me being really
Oh,
mean back.
bark. No way. We can talk about them together. I, I'm
Okay,
on a laptop. I can't see stuff. Okay, go ahead.
let's start at the top. Positional. And actually, this is one that you love because you get quite animated at the framing that a chief of staff is entry level.
It, it's interesting to me because you suggest that I get animated at just this topic as opposed to the 700,000 other topics that we talk about that I get animated about as well. Because I'm, the Jewish girl from Philly, so I am not the buttoned up Brit. I am quite the opposite. Um, but it turns out, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
so
mean,
positional.
it is positional, and it is the whole company, the whole
Yeah, and
organization.
so the positional issue is that, it's a senior leadership position. It is not something that you do 2 to 3 years out of college, or I would say even business school. Like, it is not, and I actually think that there's an interesting problem at hand, because a lot of the jobs that prepare you to be a chief of staff are getting easily replaced by AI. So I'll put out that I don't know that there's a solution to this per se, but you need to spend a lot of time in rooms, watching people, observing the way that dynamics work. You need to spend a ton of time with executives, understanding how they think, how they approach the world, and how to constructively challenge them. Right. And so that requires just years. It just requires time. And I think right now we're seeing, particularly in the founder space, a lot of people who don't think that that's the most important requirement. And, you really, you're not hiring for a chief of staff if they're 2 or 3 years out. It needs to be a lot of years around a lot of different issues, people, personalities, power, all of the things that you need in order to make good assessments in the moment about a lot of things that are happening. You and I both have worked in politics, and so we're accustomed to a sort of relentless kind of pace. But still, in corporate America too, there's a relentless pace, which is everybody's trying to make money, right? And you need to be able to be smart about what you're advising and who you're advising and what levers you pull and when. And that requires being a senior leader. I just think it's a matter of time.
It is. It's a senior role with real authority. And the other aspect of the positional is that it's not looking one way, just at the leader that they're working with. It's looking at the whole organization. And their role is to look at the whole system, the whole organization. It is to work and make sure that the executive is getting what they need, the leadership team are having what they need, and actually the wider organization, so that the whole thing can move. And it is probably, other than the leader that you're working with, is the only person with that whole view. Um, it's and the entry level one, or the just out of college, or 2 or 3 years experience, really interests me, because one of the key aspects is judgment. Now, I think back to when I was in my early 20s, and I'm gonna say, yeah, I probably thought I knew quite a bit. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah, and, I look back and realize that I didn't, and it is a classic thing of when you get slightly older, you realize this. But I can honestly say that I wouldn't have had the judgment required at that age. Now, that's not an age thing, because it's more the experience. And you can have a lot of experience in a short amount of time. And you can also have no experience in a long amount of time if you're just doing the same things over and over again.
That's right.
But it's about the multiple different scenarios. It's about learning the people. It's all of those things coming together, and you need a certain level of data points to be able to have that level of experience. And which is why it's not an age. It's the fact of just having that level of experience to go into it.
I think that's true, but I have to say, I'm reminded of a story um, because I was in my 20s in the West Wing. Um, there's a famous thing about the White House, which is it's called the comment line. And it's basically anyone can call the White House, and 98% of the calls are sent to the comment line where people express their comments, opinions, all the things. Um, and as the person outside of John Podesta's office, we spent quite a bit of time sending calls to the comment line. And you sort of had to figure out within the first like 3 to 5 seconds whether this was a serious call or not. And I had just returned from an international trip where I did advance for the president. And it was the right before the Bush v. Gore Supreme Court decision came down. Or no, I'm sorry. It was right after. It was right after this decision came down. Um, and I picked up the phone and a guy said to me, "Hey, is John there?" And for a millisecond, I thought, I think this is a comment line question. I think this is a comment line call. And then I sort of believed my own gut, which was maybe I should hear this guy out a little bit more before I send him to the comment line. And it turns out that that call was Andy Card, Bush's chief of staff, calling John about setting up time to do this transition. And it actually appeared on CNN like roughly 5 minutes after it happened. It was like flashed. Andy Card calls the chief of staff's office. And I thought, holy shit, I almost sent that guy to the comment line because that would have been a very different headline on CNN. But all of which is to say, that's right. Like you're developing and you're building experience and you're trying to figure out what you trust and what you don't. And there's it's a confusing time. It's not a time where I think people generally don't identify the 20s as a time that was filled with confidence, except maybe if you're Mark Zuckerberg. But like, that's it, right?
It is. But then also it comes on to the second aspect, the second function, which is political intelligence.
Little p.
Little p. And that's really
Yeah.
important. It is politics with a little p. And it's not being the Machiavellian puppet master behind the scenes.
I mean, come on, chiefs
Although
aren't really like it anyway.
I mean, I'm laughing because I'm fairly sure some people would describe me like that. But it's not about that. It's about understanding where the influence, who sits with the influence, where the alliances are, where the tensions are, what motivates people, what's worrying people, who is the person who is probably going to derail this project, who is the person that can bring everyone together on this, or if someone's going off the script, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be you that can bring them back, but you might know that Fred over here absolutely would be able to. It's understanding all of that huge human network within the organization and outside the organization as well.
Yeah, I sort of refer to it as the omniscient narrator. Like you're expected to know what's going to happen, what's in everybody's head, and how it's going to happen, right? Because you just sort of understand. And look, that takes a lot of work. That is not something that you get because of one conversation or one-on-one. Like this is a building trust, building relationships, understanding people. And yeah, that's the real value that the role brings, is that you get to play political chess in essence, little p, but you're trying to figure out what are the 16 steps ahead. And the famous story about that, of course, is that and I don't want to make it seem like you're providing the definition and I'm providing supportive anecdotes, but nevertheless, I have a really good story about this one, which is
Go for it.
John
Go for
Podesta
it.
famously, it was the Democrats had just won the midterms. Clinton had just won the midterms, and John Podesta, and everybody thought, oh, we've sort of moved past the idea of impeachment. It's not going to happen. It's going to be great. We're going to have everything. We're going to have Democrats everywhere. It's going to be fabulous. And John Podesta, who's an extremely avid runner, he was running through Rock Creek Park, which is a famous park here in DC, over Thanksgiving. He was just running, and he started to sort of see the numbers in his head. And he started to realize that Tom DeLay didn't need the midterms in order to launch an impeachment. And that Monday, John walked into the Oval Office and said, Mr. President, they're going to impeach you, and we need to build a war room right now. And, that really solidified him. He was the deputy chief of staff at the time. And when Erskine Bowles, the preceding chief of staff, left, John was the natural successor because he understood the map and all of the politics that go on. And he understood that there were ways in which impeachment was going to happen, and it was inevitable. And he sort of foretold this whole nightmare for President Clinton. And, it really put them on the offense instead of the defense. So, yeah, you
And it's
basically have to be able to call impeachment all the time. All the
but
time.
also, I mean, I'm not quite sure that it needs to be that extreme. But
It should be.
but the other aspect is that's misunderstood at times is you need to be removed from the politics as well. You can't be the cause of the office politics.
Yep.
And you need to be fair. You need to be the impartial person at the center, because you need to then be able to say no, or you're wrong, or you need to know this. And
And
without being the
that's
one that's
why,
feeding into the drama.
well, and I just want to point out, that's why the chief of staff needs to be Switzerland. If you have a P&L under you, then you're going to advocate for those resources. You're going to want those things, right? And then you can't advocate broadly for the organization, which is really your ultimate remit.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that the chief of staff is tethered to an executive. And yes, the executive hires you and there is a relationship that needs to be maintained. But ultimately, the job of the chief of staff, and why it's different from an executive assistant, just to pull it all around here, is you're moving the organization forward on behalf of the executive. You are not responsible for the day-to-day intricacies of the executive. And so it's really important to be neutral and to play Switzerland. And I think a lot of companies get that wrong.
Yeah, the only time there are exceptions, I mean, they're different sized organizations, and we will go into those differences in later episodes. But as a standard, yeah, absolutely. No function, no P&L. You need to be able to advocate for the right thing for the whole organization, and not feeling that you need to advocate for your function to make that work. It's absolutely the case. And I've just remembered the word that I couldn't think of earlier, and it's amazing. It is. It wasn't going to fill me with confidence. There we go. And that is the word that I could not remember.
Okay,
So
but back to political.
back to the 9 functions. So we've discussed the first 2, and
Yeah,
I would say that we should look at the next ones in our next episode.
I think that's right because number one, it provides somewhat of a cliffhanger. And number 2, if you're actually watching right now, you've held on longer than I ever anticipated or thought was possible. Like,
I
are
mean
you really still listening to us? Okay.
someone might be. I mean, maybe my husband or
My
oh
husband
god,
is definitely not listening this long. Yeah.
I was just thinking I could use it as a punishment for one of the children if they annoy
Oh,
me.
yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah,
a good one.
yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so next time, the next parts of the functions of the chief staff role.
Woo! I'm excited. Get excited.